At 95 years old, Joanne Woodward lives quietly, far from the flashing cameras and red carpets that once defined her life. Once celebrated as one of Hollywood's most talented actresses, she now reflects on a journey that stretched across nearly a century, a journey of art, fame, sacrifice, and a marriage that defied everything Hollywood usually stands for. While the industry has seen countless relationships built on glamour only to collapse under the weight of fame, Joanne's love story with Paul Newman stood apart. Theirs was not the story of tabloid scandals or fleeting attraction, but a bond that endured for 5 decades, tested by fame, temptation, and personal struggles, yet strengthened by loyalty and unshakable devotion. As Joanne enters the twilight of her life, the silence she has long kept about the private world she shared with Paul Newman begins to feel even more powerful. The question lingers: why did she guard their story so fiercely, and what truths lie in the love she finally acknowledges now? From the outside, Paul Newman was the perfect Hollywood star, blue-eyed, charming, endlessly talented. Joanne Woodward, meanwhile, was a star in her own right, earning an Academy Award early in her career and commanding respect as one of the finest actresses of her generation. Yet when their lives collided, the story that unfolded wasn't about competition, but partnership. Against all odds, they created a marriage that became legendary in an industry notorious for short-lived unions. Still, behind the iconic photographs of them laughing on set or walking hand in hand on red carpets, there was a private world filled with choices, sacrifices, and moments of resilience that the public rarely saw. For years, Joanne chose to stay quiet about the struggles and victories of their relationship, allowing the myth of Hollywood's golden couple to stand on its own. But now, as time has stripped away the glamour and left only memory, her silence speaks volumes, and her reflections shine a light on what it really meant to love Paul Newman. This story is not just about 2 stars who fell in love, it is about the intersection of fame and intimacy, about how 2 people managed to hold on to each other when the entire world wanted a piece of them. It is about how Joanne Woodward, often overshadowed by Paul's larger-than-life image, carved out her own identity while still being the anchor of their family. It is about Paul Newman, whose brilliance on screen was matched by vulnerability off it, and the woman who stood by him through triumph and turbulence alike. As we step back into the early 1950s, when a young Joanne first crossed paths with a then-married Paul Newman, we uncover the beginnings of a love story that would grow into one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. What follows is not simply a biography of 2 actors, but a testament to devotion, sacrifice, and a love that outlasted the very industry that tried to define it. Joanne Jigniliat Trimia Woodward was born on February 27, 1930, in the small town of Thomasville, Georgia. The South of her childhood was a place of tradition, but also of quiet limitations, particularly for young women. Joanne's early years were shaped by change and instability when her parents separated, leaving her to be raised largely under the watchful eye of her mother, Eleanor. It was her mother's encouragement that helped steer Joanne toward the world of stories and performance. While life in Thomasville might have seemed ordinary, Joanne carried within her a spark of imagination and a fascination with characters that would ultimately lead her far from the quiet streets of her hometown. From an early age, she was captivated by movies. The silver screen was a portal to something larger than life, and one actress in particular left a lasting mark on young Joanne, Bette Davis. Davis was strong, commanding, and unapologetically bold, qualities that Joanne admired and sought to embody herself. Watching Davis, she began to dream not just of being part of that glamorous world, but of making her own mark as a serious actress. This passion wasn't a fleeting childhood fancy, it grew stronger as Joanne did, pushing her toward opportunities that could turn her dream into reality. Her adolescence was marked by frequent moves, following her family as they searched for stability and new beginnings. Each new school meant starting over, but Joanne found her footing in one consistent place: the theater. In high school, she immersed herself in drama productions, discovering a gift for performance that others quickly noticed. Standing under stage lights, even in small-town auditoriums, gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt anywhere else. Acting wasn't just play for Joanne, it was the foundation of who she was meant to be. When it came time for college, she chose Louisiana State University, where she studied drama seriously. Surrounded by peers who also had ambitions beyond the classroom, Joanne honed her craft, studying the mechanics of theater, character, and dialogue. At LSU, she found a balance between academic discipline and artistic exploration. She began to see acting not as a distant dream but as a professional path she could pursue with determination. By the time she graduated, she had cultivated not only skill but also the confidence to take her ambitions to the next level. That next step was bold, moving to New York City. For a young woman from the South in the 1950s, this was no small decision. New York was the center of American theater and television, a place brimming with opportunities for those willing to fight for them. Joanne arrived with the same determination she had carried since childhood, ready to learn and to compete among the best. She enrolled at the prestigious Actors Studio, the home of method acting and a training ground for some of the greatest talents of the era. She also studied at the neighborhood playhouse, absorbing different approaches to performance and sharpening her ability to bring authenticity to any role. In New York, she was just another hopeful at first, another young actress with dreams of Broadway and beyond. But Joanne Woodward had something that set her apart, a combination of Southern charm, intelligence, and a fierce commitment to her craft. While others might have been dazzled by the allure of stardom, Joanne kept her focus on the work itself. It was this seriousness, planted in her Georgia childhood and nurtured through education and training, that prepared her for the roles and the life that would soon change everything. Paul Newman was born on January 26, 1925, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, into a comfortable middle-class family. His father, Arthur, was the owner of a sporting goods store, and his mother, Teresa, came from a family with a deep appreciation for culture and the arts. Paul's household reflected his mixed heritage. His father was Jewish, his mother was Catholic, and though religion was not the strongest influence in his upbringing, the blend of traditions gave him a nuanced sense of identity. From an early age, Paul showed a playful spirit and a knack for performance. It wasn't long before his charm and natural stage presence found an outlet in school plays. At the age of 7, he made his acting debut as the court jester in a school production of Robin Hood. Even in that small role, Paul's liveliness drew attention. His teachers and peers noticed how at ease he seemed in front of an audience. Yet acting was not the only part of his boyhood. He was also athletic and mischievous, thriving in the ordinary rhythms of Midwestern life. Still, something about the stage called to him in a way no other pursuit did, and that spark would carry him far beyond Cleveland Heights. When World War II erupted, Paul, like so many young men of his generation, enlisted in the military. He served in the U.S. Navy as a radioman and gunner, working on torpedo bombers in the Pacific Theater. Military life was far removed from the stage, but the discipline and exposure to the harsh realities of war shaped him profoundly. He witnessed both danger and loss, and by the time the war ended, Paul had matured from a restless boy into a man with determination and focus. The Navy also taught him resilience, a trait that would serve him well in the competitive world he was about to enter. After the war, Newman returned home with the GI Bill to guide him into the next chapter of his life. He enrolled at Kenyon College in Ohio, where he majored in drama. There, he began to refine his raw enthusiasm for acting into something more professional. Kenyon offered him not only the technical tools of performance but also the chance to explore literature, philosophy, and art, all of which broadened his understanding of human character, knowledge that would later inform his deeply layered performances. His time at Kenyon also revealed his charismatic leadership, as he became a standout in campus productions. During this period, Paul also made one of the first major commitments of his personal life. In 1949, he married Jackie Witt, an aspiring actress. Their marriage was full of youthful ambition and the hope of building a family while chasing careers. Together, they had 3 children, and Paul worked various jobs while continuing to pursue acting. Though deeply devoted to his family, Newman's hunger for success in the theater could not be ignored, and his ambitions would soon drive the couple toward New York City, the heart of American drama. In New York, Newman enrolled at the Actors Studio, the crucible of method acting under the guidance of Lee Strasberg, and he also trained at the Yale School of Drama for a time. The city was alive with competition, filled with young hopefuls who dreamed of stardom, yet Paul stood out. His striking looks could have easily made him just another matinee idol, but his commitment to craft and his desire to dig beneath the surface of characters set him apart. In these formative years, he blended his natural charisma with discipline, transforming himself into not just a handsome actor but a serious artist. The boy from Cleveland Heights, shaped by war, education, and ambition, was ready to step onto the stage of destiny where he would soon meet a woman who would alter the course of his life forever. In the early 1950s, Broadway was alive with energy, and among the productions that drew young actors hoping for a breakthrough was William Inger's Picnic. It was here, backstage in the world of understudies, that Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman first crossed paths. Both were still carving out their futures, neither yet the stars they would become. Paul, with his piercing blue eyes and striking good looks, was already turning heads, while Joanne carried herself with quiet intelligence and a grounded presence that made her stand out in a city overflowing with ambition. The encounter would prove to be the start of a story that neither of them could have scripted, a story that would alter both of their lives. For Joanne, meeting Paul was disarming. She later admitted her first impression: he was simply too good-looking to be true. In a profession where beauty often overshadowed substance, she assumed a man so handsome might lack depth. Yet, as rehearsals unfolded, she noticed qualities that went far beyond his appearance. Paul was not only serious about his craft but also genuinely kind, humble, and deeply thoughtful. While other actors might have leaned on charm, Paul showed a desire to understand people, to dig into the psychology of a role, and this dedication impressed Joanne. For Paul, Joanne was unlike anyone he had known. At the time, he was still married to his first wife, Jackie Witt, and the father of 3 young children. Yet, beneath his sense of responsibility, he found himself drawn to Joanne's confidence, wit, and no-nonsense demeanor. Where many were dazzled by his looks, Joanne treated him with refreshing honesty. She was not intimidated by his presence, nor did she seek to flatter him. Instead, she challenged him, grounding their conversations in reality and intelligence. It was this quality, rather than her beauty alone, that captivated Paul and began to stir feelings he could not ignore. Their friendship grew naturally in the shadows of the stage. Long hours of rehearsals, waiting in wings, and quiet backstage moments gave them space to talk about their lives, their dreams, and their frustrations. They shared laughs and private thoughts, building a connection that felt both exciting and safe. At first, there was no outward romance. Joanne respected Paul's marriage, and Paul himself was torn between loyalty to his family and the undeniable pull he felt toward her. But the spark between them was impossible to dismiss, and slowly it deepened into something more. Paul's struggle during this period was profound. He was not a man who took commitments lightly, and he loved his children. Yet his marriage to Jackie had begun to fray under the weight of his growing ambitions and long hours away from home. Joanne represented something different: stability, authenticity, and the kind of partnership he had been yearning for. With her, he could be himself, stripped of the image Hollywood and the theater world already wanted to project onto him. The romance that eventually bloomed was not a whirlwind affair, but a slow burn fueled by friendship and mutual respect. 4 years, their bond simmered beneath the surface, as Paul wrestled with guilt and responsibility, and Joanne tried to protect herself from heartbreak. But the truth became undeniable: they belonged together. It was a love that would defy the conventions of the time, carry scandalous whispers in Hollywood, and yet, in the end, proved to be one of the most enduring partnerships the industry had ever seen. By the late 1950s, the slow-burning connection between Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward could no longer be kept in the shadows. Paul had spent years torn between the responsibilities of his marriage to Jackie Witt and the undeniable pull he felt toward Joanne. It was not a decision made lightly. He had 3 children with Jackie, and divorce was still viewed as scandalous in many circles during that era. Yet in 1958, Paul finally made the painful choice to end his first marriage. That same year, he and Joanne took the step that would forever define their lives together. They married in Las Vegas, far from the glitz of Hollywood and the judgment of Broadway. What began as a controversial love story became the cornerstone of one of the most admired marriages in show business. Their wedding was simple, almost understated, but it marked the beginning of a partnership that would capture the imagination of the public for decades to come. Soon after, they embarked on a honeymoon in Europe, a trip that gave them the rare gift of privacy and freedom to celebrate each other away from the cameras. It was a chance to step into their new life as husband and wife, not as 2 actors chased by scandal, but as 2 people determined to build a life rooted in love and mutual respect. That honeymoon symbolized not just romance but also escape, a brief pause before returning to an industry that would keep them in its spotlight for years to come. When they returned, however, the whispers were already swirling. Hollywood was buzzing with gossip. Paul Newman, the handsome rising star, had left his wife and children for a fellow actress, scandalous enough to fuel endless headlines. Many wondered if their marriage would survive the scrutiny. In an industry where relationships often collapsed under far less pressure, skepticism was high. Yet Joanne and Paul refused to let public opinion dictate their lives. They were determined to protect their bond, even if that meant making personal sacrifices along the way. Joanne, who had already established herself as a leading actress by winning an Academy Award for The Three Faces of Eve, made a surprising choice in the years following her marriage. She stepped back from the fast-paced pursuit of stardom to focus on her new role as a wife and, soon after, as a mother. While she continued to act and took on memorable roles, Joanne deliberately chose to let Paul's career take center stage, creating stability at home for their growing family. For a woman of such talent, it was a sacrifice, but one she made out of love and commitment. Behind the glamour, she became the anchor that allowed Paul to flourish in Hollywood without losing himself entirely to its chaos. For Paul, this marriage offered something he had never experienced before. Joanne was not dazzled by his fame or blinded by his looks. She grounded him, challenging him to be better as an actor, as a husband, and as a man. Their home life became a sanctuary, a place where Paul could escape the relentless demands of Hollywood. Together, they created a balance between the dazzling spotlight and the quiet rhythms of family life in Westport, Connecticut, far from the glare of Los Angeles. What began in scandal soon transformed into a love story that silenced the critics. Their marriage would endure not just for a few years but for half a century, weathering trials and temptations that could have easily destroyed it. For Joanne and Paul, 1958 was not merely the year of marriage, it was the beginning of a bond that would become a legend, a rare Hollywood story where love, rather than gossip, had the final word. Joanne Woodward's ascent as an actress was anything but ordinary. Long before she became known as Paul Newman's wife, she carved out a reputation as a performer of rare depth and intelligence. Her true breakthrough came in 1957 with The Three Faces of Eve, a film that demanded extraordinary versatility. Playing a woman with multiple personality disorder, Woodward had to embody three entirely different personas: timid housewife, flamboyant socialite, and childlike innocent, often within the same scene. It was a performance of astonishing precision and emotional honesty, and it earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress. Practically overnight, Joanne Woodward went from being a promising newcomer to one of Hollywood's most respected leading ladies. Her Oscar win could have easily placed her into the spotlight as a glamorous figurehead, but Joanne resisted that trap. Instead, she gravitated toward roles that allowed her to explore the complexities of women's lives, often portraying characters who were layered, conflicted, and far from stereotypical. In A Kiss Before Dying, 1956, she displayed early hints of that seriousness, while The Long, Hot Summer, 1958, not only paired her on screen with Paul Newman but also showcased her ability to hold her own opposite his charismatic presence. Critics noted her strength and individuality, proving she was far more than just a complement to Newman's star power. Later, in Rachel, 1968, directed by Newman himself, Joanne gave one of her most acclaimed performances as a schoolteacher confronting loneliness and unfulfilled dreams. The role earned her another Academy Award nomination and further cemented her reputation as one of the finest actresses of her generation. What made Joanne's career particularly remarkable was the way she balanced her artistry with her responsibilities at home. Unlike many actresses of her time, she chose not to chase fame relentlessly. Instead, she created a life in which her children and her marriage were at the center, carefully selecting projects that allowed her to maintain both a family life and a career. This decision often meant stepping away from opportunities that might have elevated her celebrity status even further, but it also set her apart. Joanne Woodward never became a tabloid fixture or a Hollywood stereotype. She became something rarer, a respected working actress who navigated success on her own terms. As the years progressed, Joanne expanded her reach beyond film and into television, where she continued to prove her versatility. Her Emmy-winning performances included roles in See How She Runs, 1978, and Do You Remember Love, 1985, the latter in which she played a woman suffering from Alzheimer's disease. These roles allowed her to explore complex emotional territory, connecting with audiences who saw in her not just a glamorous star but a relatable, deeply human performer. Each television project reaffirmed that Joanne's talent was not limited to the silver screen but extended across mediums with the same emotional power. By the 1980s and beyond, Woodward had amassed a career filled with accolades, an Oscar, multiple Emmy Awards, Golden Globes, and the respect of her peers. Yet her success was never defined by the trophies on her shelf. It was defined by the integrity of her choices and her refusal to let Hollywood dictate the terms of her career. Even as she stood beside one of the most admired men in Hollywood, Joanne Woodward never allowed herself to be reduced to Paul Newman's wife. She was, and remains, an actress of remarkable skill and a woman of unwavering independence, whose rise to prominence was fueled not by scandal or publicity but by an unshakable devotion to her craft. Paul Newman's rise to stardom was as swift as it was dazzling. After years of honing his craft in New York and working his way through stage and television roles, he broke through in the mid-1950s with Somebody Up There Likes Me, 1956. Playing real-life boxer Rocky Graziano, Newman captured critics' attention with his raw physicality and emotional authenticity. This performance proved he was more than just a handsome face, he was an actor with substance. That early triumph opened doors, but it was his role in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, 1958, opposite Elizabeth Taylor, that cemented his place among Hollywood's most sought-after leading men. His portrayal of Brick, a brooding and emotionally wounded ex-athlete, revealed a depth that captivated audiences and earned him his first Academy Award nomination. By the 1960s, Newman had become one of the most bankable stars in the industry. His screen presence was magnetic, those piercing blue eyes, combined with his mix of vulnerability and toughness, made him irresistible to audiences. But what kept him at the top was not just his looks, it was his versatility. In The Hustler, 1961, he embodied Fast Eddie Felson, a pool hustler whose cocky bravado concealed deep insecurity. In HUD, 1963, he delivered one of his most memorable performances as a selfish, morally ambiguous anti-hero, earning critical praise even as the character repelled viewers. Newman wasn't afraid to take risks or to play flawed men, which set him apart from other heartthrobs of the era. The late 1960s brought Cool Hand Luke, 1967, a role that became one of Newman's most iconic. As the rebellious prisoner who refuses to conform, he created a character that became a symbol of defiance and resilience. The line "What we've got here is failure to communicate" entered popular culture, and Newman's image as both a charismatic star and a serious actor was solidified. Soon after came two legendary collaborations with Robert Redford, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, and The Sting, 1973. Both films were enormous box office successes, blending charm, wit, and style in a way that showcased Newman's effortless chemistry with Redford and his enduring appeal to audiences worldwide. Yet behind the charm and the string of box office hits, Newman wrestled with his own demons. Fame brought pressure, constant scrutiny, and the temptations of Hollywood. He turned to alcohol as a way to cope, and by his own admission, drinking became a destructive habit during some of his prime years. His struggles with alcohol strained relationships and threatened to undermine his success, but it was Joanne who provided him with the grounding force he needed. Where Hollywood demanded constant reinvention and public perfection, Joanne offered stability and honesty. She was unafraid to confront him when his drinking became excessive, and her unwavering presence reminded him of what truly mattered. Through it all, Joanne remained his anchor. While the world saw Newman as an untouchable star, she saw the man behind the image, the one vulnerable to self-doubt, guilt, and the weight of expectations. Their home in Connecticut gave him a sanctuary far from the Hollywood machine, a place where he could be a husband and father rather than just a celebrity. That balance, supported by Joanne's strength, allowed Newman not only to endure the highs and lows of fame but also to emerge as one of the most respected actors of his generation. His stardom was undeniable, but it was his struggles and the way he overcame them with Joanne's support that gave his story the depth of a true Hollywood legend. Hollywood has always been a place where marriages are tested, often shattered by the weight of fame, temptation, and constant scrutiny. For Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, the pressure was relentless. By the late 1950s and through the 1960s, Paul had become one of the world's most admired leading men. His charisma, good looks, and star power drew attention everywhere he went. Women adored him, magazines followed his every move, and gossip columns speculated endlessly about his private life. Rumors of affairs circulated throughout his career, fueled by the idea that no Hollywood heartthrob could possibly remain faithful in an industry built on desire and fantasy. Newman himself did little to avoid attention. His magnetic screen presence made him a constant focus of curiosity. But when asked about his marriage, he delivered one of the most quoted lines of his life: "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" It was his cheeky, yet heartfelt way of declaring loyalty to Joanne, a public acknowledgement that, despite the temptations of Hollywood, she was his partner, his equal, and his anchor. The phrase became symbolic of their relationship, shorthand for a devotion that defied the stereotypes of wandering Hollywood husbands. Behind closed doors, however, the marriage was not without its struggles. Paul's battles with alcohol at times tested their bond. The pressures of fame and the demands of a film career often left him emotionally drained. Yet through it all, Joanne remained a source of quiet strength. She did not indulge in gossip, nor did she seek to air their challenges in public. Instead, she built her life around resilience and loyalty. Unlike many Hollywood couples who leaned into the glamour of the spotlight, Joanne resisted it. She wanted something real, a life grounded in love and family rather than appearances. That determination led to one of the couple's most important decisions: to move away from Los Angeles and raise their family in Westport, Connecticut. For Joanne, the choice wasn't just about privacy, it was about survival. Living in Hollywood meant constant exposure to industry politics, paparazzi, and temptations. Westport, by contrast, offered space, normalcy, and community. In Connecticut, they could raise their children without the constant glare of cameras. Newman could garden, cook, and drive his race cars. Joanne could focus on her acting projects when she chose to, and on motherhood when she preferred. Their home became a retreat from the chaos of Hollywood, a sanctuary where love and family life came first. Friends who visited often spoke of the warmth and authenticity of their household. The move didn't erase the pressures Newman felt or the rumors that followed him, but it gave their marriage breathing room. Joanne's refusal to engage with Hollywood's toxic rumor mill allowed her to preserve her dignity and protect her family. She understood that love is not maintained by grand gestures or public declarations but through daily acts of loyalty, patience, and forgiveness. Theirs was not a perfect marriage, no marriage ever is, but it was a resilient one. They faced challenges that could have easily torn them apart, yet they emerged stronger because they chose to fight for each other. Paul's fame might have belonged to the world, but his heart belonged to Joanne, and she, in turn, built a life that gave him the stability he needed to endure the storms of celebrity. In an industry where so many couples fell apart under the weight of temptation, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward stood out as rare proof that love, when grounded in trust and strength, could last a lifetime. By the time Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were firmly established as one of Hollywood's most admired couples, they had already achieved what many dreamed of: fame, wealth, and artistic respect. Yet what set them apart was that they never allowed their lives to revolve solely around Hollywood. For both Paul and Joanne, their partnership became about something larger, using their success as a platform to give back, to create meaningful change in the world, and to leave behind a legacy far greater than box office numbers or awards. One of the most remarkable examples of this came in 1988, when Paul founded the Hole in the Wall gang camp in Ashford, Connecticut. Inspired by his role in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he envisioned a place where children with serious illnesses could experience the joys of camp without being defined by their conditions. Joanne stood beside him throughout the project, lending her quiet determination and organizational insight. The camp became more than just a retreat, it was a sanctuary of laughter, healing, and freedom for kids who had often only known hospitals and treatments. Over time, the camp expanded into a network of programs serving thousands of children and families each year. Its impact felt worldwide. Equally transformative was Newman's business venture that began almost as a joke, Newman's Own. Starting with a homemade salad dressing he bottled for friends, the brand grew into a thriving food company. But rather than pocket the profits, Paul insisted that all proceeds go to charity. Since its creation in 1982, Newman's Own has donated hundreds of millions of dollars to causes ranging from education to the environment to healthcare. Joanne's influence was vital in shaping that vision. She had always valued living a life with integrity, and she encouraged Paul to pursue projects that aligned with his principles. While Newman's face appeared on the labels, Joanne's quiet moral compass was part of the company's heartbeat. Together, they redefined what celebrity philanthropy could look like: genuine, impactful, and lasting. Their sense of purpose extended to their artistic partnership as well. In 1968, Paul directed Rachel, a deeply personal film for Joanne. Playing a small-town schoolteacher confronting loneliness and unfulfilled dreams, Joanne delivered one of her most acclaimed performances. The film was nominated for multiple Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and demonstrated not just Joanne's extraordinary talent but also the creative harmony between husband and wife. Their collaboration proved that theirs was not a marriage in which one partner overshadowed the other, but a partnership where each elevated the other's gifts. Over the years, the two continued to weave their professional and personal lives together. They appeared in more than 10 films as co-stars, often portraying couples whose on-screen chemistry mirrored the warmth and complexity of their real marriage. Yet their impact wasn't confined to the screen. Friends and colleagues often remarked that the true story of Paul and Joanne was how they used their influence to serve others. Whether it was raising millions for charity, bringing joy to sick children, or crafting stories that spoke to the human condition, they turned their marriage into a mission. Their partnership was a rare blend of art, activism, and authenticity. In an industry often obsessed with image, they grounded themselves in purpose. Joanne's encouragement and wisdom helped Paul channel his fame into philanthropy, while Paul's vision gave Joanne a platform to see their shared values realized on a larger scale. Together, they proved that a Hollywood marriage could be more than red carpets and magazine covers; it could change lives. And that is perhaps the greatest legacy they left behind, not just the films or the awards, but the real-world impact of two people who decided to make their love mean something far beyond themselves. As the years passed, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward continued to prove that theirs was not simply a Hollywood love story, but a lifelong partnership tested by both triumph and tragedy. In the later decades of their lives, their careers evolved alongside their personal challenges, and ultimately, they faced the most difficult battle of all: illness and loss. Paul's later career was a testament to his refusal to coast on charm or reputation. Even as he aged, he continued to push himself artistically. In The Verdict, 1982, he delivered one of his most acclaimed performances as Frank Galvin, a washed-up lawyer fighting for redemption. The role earned him an Academy Award nomination and reminded audiences that Newman was more than a movie star; he was a master of his craft. A few years later, in The Color of Money, 1986, Newman reprised his role as Fast Eddie Felson from The Hustler, this time as a seasoned mentor guiding a younger protégé, played by Tom Cruise. The performance was powerful, layered, and deeply human, finally winning him the long-overdue Academy Award for Best Actor. Even in his 70s, Newman showed no signs of slowing down, taking on memorable roles in films like Nobody's Fool, 1994, and Road to Perdition, 2002, where his portrayal of an aging mob boss earned him yet another Oscar nomination. Joanne, meanwhile, shifted her focus in these years. While she never fully left acting, she increasingly took on roles in television and turned her energy toward producing and mentoring younger talent. Her Emmy-winning performances in projects such as Do You Remember Love and See How She Runs revealed her continuing power as an actress, even as she balanced other responsibilities. Joanne also worked behind the camera, helping to guide projects that reflected her interest in authentic, character-driven stories. To the young actors she mentored, she wasn't just an Oscar winner but a source of wisdom, discipline, and encouragement. But their professional successes were eventually overshadowed by personal trials. In 2008, Paul Newman was diagnosed with lung cancer. For a man who had lived with such vitality, racing cars, making films, pouring energy into philanthropy, the diagnosis was devastating. He underwent treatment but faced his illness with the same quiet dignity that had defined his life. On September 26, 2008, Paul passed away at the age of 83, surrounded by family at their home in Westport, Connecticut. For Joanne, The loss was immeasurable. After 50 years of marriage, her partner, confidant, and great love was gone. She withdrew from the public eye, choosing to grieve privately rather than invite the world into her sorrow. As the years went on, Joanne faced struggles of her own. Reports emerged that she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a cruel irony for a woman whose career had been built on her sharp intelligence and emotional clarity. The disease slowly took away her ability to work, to engage with the craft that had defined her for so long, and eventually, to remain present in the world she had shared with Paul. Friends and family continued to care for her, but the image of Joanne Woodward, the vibrant actress, the loyal wife, the philanthropic partner, began to fade from the public view. Yet even in decline, the story of Joanne and Paul remained one of extraordinary devotion. His final years had been filled with gratitude for her constant presence, and her later years, though marked by loss and illness, carried the imprint of the life they built together. It was a reminder that love stories don't end with the final curtain, they echo on in the lives touched, the legacies created, and the memories cherished. For Joanne, living into her 90s, the years without Paul were quieter, lonelier, but always rooted in the extraordinary bond they had shared. Their story, even in its later chapters, continued to be one of endurance, loyalty, and the kind of love that survives even the greatest loss. At 95, Joanne Woodward lives far from the glittering lights that once defined her career and marriage. Her life today is quiet, private, and centered on the love of her family. After decades in the public eye, she has chosen a path of peace, away from interviews, red carpets, and the relentless curiosity of Hollywood. Friends and those close to her describe her days as gentle and reserved, a rhythm befitting a woman who gave so much of herself to her craft, her marriage, and the causes she believed in. Her health struggles, particularly Alzheimer's disease, have made her retreat from public life even more pronounced, but her legacy speaks louder than any spotlight could. When people look back on Joanne's marriage to Paul Newman, what stands out most is not the glamour but the depth of their loyalty to each other. For 50 years, theirs was a union that defied Hollywood odds. Joanne often reflected on their relationship with a mixture of candor and humor, acknowledging Paul's irresistible charm but also recognizing his flaws. She knew the weight of his struggles, his bouts with drinking, the relentless demands of fame, and yet she stood by him with unwavering resolve. To Joanne, love was not about perfection, it was about endurance. It was about facing storms together and remembering, even in the darkest moments, that their bond was worth protecting. Her silence through the years has been as powerful as any statement. Joanne never sought to correct every rumor or respond to every piece of gossip. Instead, she let her life with Paul speak for itself. In an era when Hollywood couples often made headlines for scandal and betrayal, Joanne's refusal to participate in that cycle was its own quiet act of dignity. She chose to preserve the sanctity of her marriage, keeping its truths, its joys, its struggles, its intimacy between herself and Paul. That choice, more than anything, reveals her strength. She didn't need the world's validation to know what they had built together. And yet, in her rare reflections, she gave glimpses into the reality of their love. She described Paul as not only handsome and talented but also deeply human, a man who wrestled with insecurities, who sometimes stumbled, but who never failed to adore his wife and children. She often reminded others that their life together was not a fairy tale. It was hard work, sacrifice, and compromise. But it was also laughter, partnership, and a love that endured across decades. That honesty, coming from Joanne, made their love story even more remarkable. It wasn't perfect, it was real. Now, at 95, Joanne's silence is not emptiness but eloquence. It is the silence of a woman who understands that love doesn't need to be explained or defended. It is the silence of someone who lived through the storms of fame and chose instead to focus on what truly mattered. Her legacy is not only in the Oscar she won, the roles she played, or the awards she collected, but in the life she lived with Paul Newman, a life of loyalty, integrity, and devotion. Her story reminds us that some of the greatest love stories are not the ones shouted from rooftops, but the ones lived quietly, day after day, with dignity. Joanne Woodward's silence is not absence, it is testament. It is proof that love, real love, does not need to be loud to last forever. And in that silence, she honors both herself and the man she loved, keeping their bond alive in the most profound way possible. At 95, Joanne Woodward stands as living proof that some stories transcend the glitz and chaos of Hollywood. In her quiet, dignified way, she has finally allowed the truth of her marriage to Paul Newman to shine, not through sensational interviews or tell-all revelations, but through the life she lived and the legacy she helped build. Her silence was never emptiness, it was strength. And now, looking back across the decades, the story that emerges is not one of scandal, betrayal, or broken dreams, but of endurance, loyalty, and love that outlasted even death. In Hollywood, marriages often flicker and fade like camera flashes, but Joanne and Paul defied those odds. From their first meeting in the 1950s to their wedding in 1958, they built a union that survived the temptations of fame, the weight of gossip, and the challenges of personal struggle. Paul Newman may have been one of the most desired men of his generation, but Joanne was always his home, his anchor, his stake at home, as he famously put it. Their love was not perfect, but it was real, messy, human, and, above all, enduring. Their legacy stretches far beyond their iconic films. Together, they became a force for good in the world. Through Newman's Own, which has donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charity, and the Hole in the Wall gang camp, which has brought joy to thousands of children with serious illnesses, they proved that celebrity could be a tool for compassion. Joanne's influence, her wisdom, her moral compass, her refusal to compromise on what mattered helped guide Paul toward building a life of meaning beyond the screen. Their shared vision created ripples that continue to impact lives long after Paul's passing. And then there is the family they raised, the life they built away from Hollywood in Westport, Connecticut. While others chased the spotlight, Joanne and Paul chose authenticity. They raised children, welcomed friends, planted roots, and built a home filled with laughter and love. For all their awards and accolades, perhaps their greatest accomplishment was simply that, creating a life that was genuine. Today, Joanne's quiet presence carries with it the echo of everything they shared. Though her health has dimmed her once vibrant public life, the essence of their story remains untarnished. It is written in the films they made, the causes they championed, the children and grandchildren who carry on their values, and in the silence that Joanne has chosen, a silence that speaks louder than any gossip or headline ever could. Paul Newman may be gone, but in Joanne Woodward's silence and strength, his presence is still alive. Their story endures not because it was glamorous, but because it was true. It reminds us that love, when built on trust, sacrifice, and devotion, can withstand the storms of fame and the passage of time. And so, as Joanne lives out her final chapter, the world remembers not just an actress and her husband, but a love story beyond Hollywood, one that continues to inspire, quietly and powerfully, to this very day.